Welcome back to the Wolverine Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Dylan Andres, and if this is your first time here, let me officially welcome you into this space of self-discovery. This podcast is more than just stories. This is a journey we take together, one layer at a time, as we explore the profound lessons that life has to offer. For those of you who don't know, this podcast is deeply personal for myself. Each episode is built around one of my own personal journal entries where I dive into the memories and emotions that attached to the experiences that shaped me, with the goal of showing you that it's okay to step into vulnerability. And today, we're tackling a subject that hits close to home for many of us: unresolved anger. Anger is one of those emotions where we're often taught to suppress or avoid. We're told to keep calm, to move on, or worse, to simply just pretend it doesn't exist. But ignoring anger doesn't make it disappear. It buries it. And buried anger is exactly where the real damage begins. Today's episode is inspired by a journal prompt that asks, when you feel anger, who is it really directed toward? And what part of you is hurting? It's a simple question on the surface, but as I explored it myself, I uncovered the layers and layers of pain and healing I still had to work through. In this episode, I'll share my journey with unresolved anger, how it used to control me, how I learned to confront it, and ultimately how I found freedom through forgiveness. Oh, and along the way, I'm going to share a deeply personal story with you about betrayal, heartbreak, and how I had to cultivate the power inside myself to let go. So grab a cup of coffee, find a quiet space, or maybe go for a walk. But let's sit back and dive in. Let's start by going back to my teenage years. Like many of us, I didn't have the tools or understanding to process anger in a healthy way. When something happened that made me feel upset or frustrated, I didn't lash out at others. I turned that anger inward at myself. Always. It became a habit, a pattern so ingrained that I didn't even recognize it for what it was. Whenever life threw me a curveball, my mind would go into overdrive, spinning stories about how I deserved it. You're not good enough. This happened because you failed. You're the problem. Those were the deafening whispers in my head. I carried this belief into every area of my life. My relationship with others, my relationship with myself, and my relationship with my health and how I looked, and even various career paths later on in life. It was like a shadow following me, subtly influencing every reaction or decision that I made. One of the most noticeable ways this showed up poorly for myself was actually in the gym space. If you knew me back then, you'd probably just think I was dedicated to the goal. I spent hours weightlifting and pushing my body to the limits, or what I call now the limits. But here's the truth. I wasn't at the gym out of love for myself or my body. I was there because I hated myself. I hated what I saw in the mirror. The gym became one of my main outlets for channeling most of the anger and frustration that I felt, but I didn't know how to express. I remember one specific day. I was about 16 years old, and something had happened earlier that week, something that triggered all those feelings of inadequacy. I just found out that my girlfriend at the time, my first girlfriend at that, cheated on me at a party. You're too fat for women to like you. You're pathetic. Why would you believe someone would choose you? These were the voices going through my head. And ironically, this was just an extra cherry on top of the stress I was already experiencing from life. Witnessing my parents' relationship crumble in front of my siblings and I, watching my dad battle and struggle with alcohol, myself struggling to feel socially accepted at school, and these are just a few to name off the top of my head. This particular day, I walked into the gym with this weight on my chest that just felt like a rock. I really wasn't sure what to do, so I did what I thought was best. Train through it. So I loaded the barbell with more weights than I had ever attempted before. Set after set, I pushed harder and harder, ignoring the strain, the pain, and the voice in my head telling me to stop. That session didn't stop until I found my head in a garbage can, puking so hard that it was coming out of my nose. And then I sat there with tears in my eyes, feeling absolutely pathetic. By the end of that session, I wasn't just physically exhausted, I made myself emotionally numb. And yet, as I left the gym and I locked the door behind me, yes, I was the last one there, I told myself that it was a good workout. Iron therapy, as I called it. Looking back now that I'm a little older and a little wiser, I see it for what it was. Self-punishment. Because I didn't think I was good enough. I wasn't good enough to have a faithful girlfriend. I wasn't good enough to have a happy family. I wasn't good enough for any, what I felt, real friends anymore. I wasn't good enough to love who I was. And this pattern repeated itself. For years, I masked my self-destruction under the guise of fitness, convincing myself that I was just being disciplined. But discipline rooted in self-hatred isn't discipline at all. It's a form of self-abuse. Now, to take a little bit of a left turn here, I am not saying that the gym isn't a good form of therapy. It truly can be, and it should be a healthy form of therapy. However, when we start our fitness journey on the foundation of self-hate, we will never find the fulfillment or happiness that we are seeking outside of ourselves. It's only when we choose to take a look inside and heal our relationship with ourselves that we truly begin to feel whole and complete. Gym lifestyle or not, there is nothing outside of ourselves that will change the way that we feel inside. We must address and change our relationship with the root of the original insecurity that led us to the gym in the first place. This epiphany or turning point or realization, whatever you want to call it, that came to me, it came to me in about my mid to late 20s. By that time, I had just started exploring personal development and spirituality, really trying to figure out why I was the way that I was. I began to notice the patterns in my life, the way that I internalized anger and the way that I used to justify my negative self-image. One day, during a particularly intense bout of frustration, I sat down with my journal and I wrote a single question. Why am I so angry? The interesting thing was that everything that I wrote was from self. It wasn't what happened that made me angry. It was what I made what happened mean about me. Now, I'm going to say that again. It wasn't what happened that made me angry. It was what I made what happened mean about me. And because I was playing the same victimizing narrative over and over in my head, my subconscious was intentionally looking for more information, taking it, twisting it, and throwing this back at me. This is called a cognitive bias. We look for things that we believe. I believed that I was inadequate, so I looked for things to make me believe that I was inadequate. So how did I fix this? You wondering? I decided to start entertaining the idea of changing the meaning I was giving everything. Basically, I had come to terms that the whole world wasn't revolving around me or making me feel unworthy. How was my own doing? I was doing this to myself. I was making me feel unworthy. And that's because I unintentionally chose to program my brain this way through the experiences that I went through. And we all do this. This was a tough pill for me to swallow at first. However, over time, I realized how empowering this actually is. But I was only able to step into that once I understood that I had to forgive myself first. This leads us to that other personal, more recent story I told you about in the beginning of this episode. how I had to learn how to release anger of betrayal through forgiveness. Years ago, someone came into my life who became a very close friend, a person I once considered family. This person held space in my life for the better part of 10 years. It actually wasn't until this year that I was able to fully let go of that situation that happened. Going back to that same time, in my early 20s, I was in a romantic relationship and engagement that ended very unexpectedly. For years, I had an intuitive feeling that something had happened between my friend of 10 years and my partner. Something that contributed to the breakup of this specific romantic relationship. I carried this suspicion like a giant suitcase, carrying it with me wherever I went and letting it fester into resentment. But instead of addressing it, I buried it. I looked the other way. I told myself it didn't matter. I convinced myself I was over it. But deep down, the anger was still there. The curiosity on whether or not my intuition, that gut feeling I had, was right or not, just poked, and poked. Over the duration of 2024, I realized that I needed closure on this once and for all. I couldn't carry that giant suitcase anymore, and I needed to open it up and see if my intuition was in fact correct. It didn't matter what I found out to be true. I just needed to know whether or not my intuition was right. So I reached out to my former fiance and asked a few questions that I have been avoiding for so terribly long. Her answers, in fact, confirmed what I had expected. It was a painful thing to hear. Yeah, I'm not going to lie about that, but it was also liberating. For the first time, I allowed myself to truly feel that anger and frustration, the betrayal, the heartbreak. And then I made a choice. I chose to forgive. I was finally able to cut those cords without any wonder or curiosity. And even though the actions they took hurt me back then, I have no anger or resentment towards either of them today. Because in my heart, I now know and understand that we do what we feel is best for us with the current level of knowledge and wisdom that we have at the time. I understand that all of us are struggling to deal with something, and some of us choose to deal with those things in ways that we all might not agree with. So even after finding this information out, I still wish both of them all of the peace, all of the love, and all of the success in their lives. Because at the end of the day, I now understand that hurt people. And most of those hurt people don't have an intention of hurting people. They have an intention of trying to escape their own hurt in whatever way that they can. So I chose forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't about excusing what happened or pretending that it didn't hurt. It's about freeing ourselves from the grip of the past. In forgiving my friend and former partner, I realized something profound. The person I needed to forgive the most was actually myself. For years, I had been my own worst enemy, blaming myself for things beyond my control and punishing myself for the emotions I didn't know how to process. Forgiveness gave me back my power. It allowed me to let go of all of that anger and reclaim all of my peace. Well, most of it anyways, in this regard. So what did I learn from this? Well, first, anger is a teacher. It shows us where we're still hurting and where we need to heal. But we also have to be willing to sit with the discomfort so we can face it head on. And secondly, forgiveness is the ultimate act of self-love. It's not about letting others off the hook. It's about letting yourself off the hook, releasing the burden that we've been carrying for so long, or maybe shortly if it's something that happened recently. Regardless, as we wrap this up, I want to leave you with a challenge. Take some time to reflect on the anger you're holding on to. Who is it really directed toward, and what part of you is hurting? And what would it look like to forgive? Not for their sake, but for your sake. Grab your journal, go for a walk, or simply just sit in silence with your thoughts. Whatever it is that you choose to do, give yourself the space to explore this. You might be surprised by what you uncover. And if you're ready to take a step further into your own self-exploration journey, grab my free ebook, 30 Days to Know Yourself. Thank you for joining me for this second episode of the Wolverine Lifestyle Podcast. If it resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Reach out to me on social media, leave me a review, or share this episode with somebody who might need it. All of my social links will be in the show notes, along with the link where you can grab your free copy of 30 Days to Know Yourself. Until next time, remember, you are stronger than your anger. You are capable of forgiveness, and you deserve peace. I believe in you. It's time for you to start believing in yourself just as much as I believe in you.